At my son's wedding, in front of everyone, my daughter-in-law demanded the keys to my apartment. I didn't argue, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't cause a scene, I walked out instead. And 30 minutes later, one phone call would change everything they thought they knew about me. Let me take you to the beginning. At my son's wedding, I was dressed in golden silk. Not loud, not flashy. Just enough to remind myself that I still carried worth, whether anyone else acknowledged it or not. The fabric caught the light softly as I walked into the reception hall, elegant without trying. Around my neck rested a simple but refined necklace, gold with a single stone my late husband, Robert Hale, had given me on our 30th anniversary. Matching earrings, nothing excessive, just dignity carefully chosen. My name is Margaret Hale, I'm 69 years old, a widow, and a woman people often mistake for being easy to overlook. The ballroom glittered, crystal chandeliers, white linens, towering floral arrangements. Laughter floated through the air, effortless and carefree. Guests mingled, glasses clinked, cameras flashed. Yet as I stepped inside, I felt it immediately. I didn't belong to the celebration. I was part of the background. A few people glanced at me, their eyes lingering briefly on my dress, my jewelry, perhaps surprised. Then they looked away. No warm welcome, no guiding hand, no seat saved. My son Ethan Hale stood near the center of the room, sharp in his tailored suit, surrounded by friends. He looked older than I remembered, more rigid. When his eyes finally met mine, his smile was quick, polite, then gone. He turned back to his bride, Vanessa Hale, radiant, controlled, perfectly composed. Her white gown shimmered under the lights, every movement calculated, every expression practiced. Vanessa had always understood how to command attention. From the moment she entered Ethan's life, I sensed she measured people by usefulness, by what they owned, what they could offer, what they could give up. I took a seat near the back, smoothing the golden silk over my knees, folding my hands calmly in my lap. I had raised Ethan alone after Robert passed. I had given him everything I had: time, love, stability. I never asked for applause, I never demanded gratitude. I believed love didn't need to be announced to be real. If this story already feels familiar, pause for a moment, tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. And if stories about quiet strength and unexpected justice matter to you, make sure you're subscribed. The ceremony passed smoothly. Vows, applause, smiles frozen for photographs. I clapped softly, pride and something heavier pressing against my chest. Ethan never looked at me during his vows. Then came the reception. Music swelled. Plates were served. Conversation filled the room. I had barely touched my food when Vanessa stood and tapped her glass. The sound sliced through the chatter. "I'd like to say a few words," she announced, her smile bright, rehearsed. Ethan stood beside her, arm around her waist, nodding as if everything about to be said had already been agreed upon. She spoke about love, about beginnings, about how important it was to start married life correctly, with stability, with space, with support. Then her gaze landed on me. The room seemed to lean inward. "Margaret," she said, my name carried like a suggestion, not a courtesy. "You live alone in a large apartment in a very desirable area." A hush fell. I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me, curious, assessing. "At your age," she continued smoothly, "it's not really practical, is it? Ethan and I are starting a family, we need room. And honestly," she paused, smiling wider, "this just makes sense." She stepped closer, the hem of her dress whispering against the floor. "Why don't you give us the apartment keys right now, tonight? That way we don't have to deal with uncomfortable conversations later." The silence was absolute. I didn't answer immediately, not because I was shocked, though I was, but because I was suddenly very clear. I looked at Ethan. He didn't defend me, he didn't interrupt, he didn't even look at me. Something inside me settled, not shattered, not screamed, settled, like a door closing quietly. "No," I said calmly. Vanessa blinked. "I'm sorry?" she asked sharply. "No," I repeated. "This is my home and this is not appropriate." Whispers rippled through the room. Vanessa's smile collapsed. "You're being selfish," she snapped, her voice now loud enough for everyone to hear. "You don't need all that space." I stood slowly, golden silk catching the light, my jewelry steady against my skin. "I said no," I replied, "and I won't discuss this." That's when her hand moved, fast, violent. The sound echoed, sharp, unforgivable. My head turned. My glasses flew from my face, skidding across the marble floor. Gasps erupted. Someone cried out softly, My cheek burned, but my chest burned hotter. Vanessa's voice cut through the chaos. That's what happens when you refuse to do what's right. Ethan still didn't move. No one rushed to help as I bent down, hands shaking, to retrieve my glasses. I could taste blood. I could feel the weight of every eye on me. I straightened. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I looked at my son one last time, then I turned and walked out. The night air hit my face as I reached the parking lot, cool and steady. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from resolve. I reached into my purse and took out my phone. There was one number I hadn't used in over a year, one man who knew everything I had kept quiet. I dialed. "Julian," I said when he answered. "It's Margaret. I need you at the Royal Crest Hall, immediately." A pause, then his calm voice. "Are you certain?" I glanced back at the glowing windows of the ballroom, music still playing, laughter pretending nothing had changed. "Yes," I said, "it's time." I ended the call and sat in my car, breathing slowly. Inside that hall, they believed the night was still under their control. They had no idea that in 30 minutes everything they depended on would begin to unravel. And that was only the beginning. I stayed in my car long after I ended the call, not because I was unsure, but because I needed the silence. Inside the hall, music continued. Glasses clinked. Laughter rose and fell in waves. From the outside, it probably looked like nothing had happened. Just another wedding, another celebration running smoothly. That illusion mattered to them. It no longer mattered to me. I watched the entrance through my windshield, my hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. The golden silk of my dress still caught the glow of the parking lot lights. My cheek throbbed faintly, but the pain felt distant, almost irrelevant. What lingered instead was clarity, sharp, steady, undeniable. For years, I had told myself that restraint was strength, that staying quiet kept peace, that stepping back was the same as being kind. Tonight proved otherwise. I thought of Robert Hale, my husband, and how he used to sit across from me at our small kitchen table, reviewing documents with the same calm focus he brought to everything. He believed in preparation, in patience, in never showing your hand until you had to. Dignity, he used to say, isn't loud, it doesn't announce itself, but it always leaves a mark. I reached into my purse and touched the edge of the folder I'd brought without fully realizing why. Old habit, instinct maybe. Inside were copies, nothing dramatic, just records, dates, agreements, numbers neatly aligned. 30 minutes, Julian had said. I checked the time, 26 minutes left. The doors to the ballroom opened briefly. A few guests stepped out for air, laughter trailing behind them. I caught fragments of conversation, nothing about me, nothing about the slap. Just cake flavors and dance songs and how beautiful the bride looked. Of course, moments like mine are inconvenient. They don't fit neatly into celebrations. I remembered the first time Vanessa Hale had visited my apartment. She'd walked through slowly, heels clicking against the hardwood floor, eyes scanning, not admiring, evaluating. She commented on the view, on the size of the rooms, on the neighborhood. "So much space," she'd said lightly. "You must rattle around in here all alone." Ethan had laughed nervously as if it were a joke. I hadn't laughed. That was when I first understood that she didn't see my home as mine. She saw it as unused potential, as something wasted on someone she considered temporary. The pressure didn't come all at once. It never does. It came as suggestions, concerns, conversations framed as care. "You shouldn't be alone so much, Mom. Vanessa worries about you. Have you thought about downsizing?" Each time I deflected gently. Each time Ethan accepted it with relief, grateful not to confront, not to choose. Tonight was simply the moment they stopped pretending. My phone buzzed. A message from Samuel Brooks, my neighbor. "I saw you leave. Are you all right?" I typed back slowly, "I'm fine, thank you for noticing." He responded almost immediately. "If you need anything, I'm here." That simple sentence grounded me more than anything else had. Sometimes the people who show up aren't the ones you raised. They're the ones who choose to see you. The ballroom doors opened again, this time wider. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, briefcase in hand. His presence was unmistakable. He didn't rush, he didn't hesitate. He walked with the kind of quiet authority that doesn't need to explain itself. Julian Mercer. Even from a distance, I could tell he hadn't come to negotiate. I stepped out of my car just as he reached the entrance. "Margaret," he said, his voice calm, eyes immediately assessing not my dress, not my face, but my posture. "Are you hurt?" "I'm intact," I replied. "That's what matters." He nodded once. Good, then let's proceed. Inside the ballroom, the mood shifted the moment Julian crossed the threshold. People noticed him, they always did. His reputation preceded him not through gossip but through consequence. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. Vanessa noticed first. I saw her stiffen near the head table, her smile faltering as her eyes followed him. Confusion crept across her face, followed by something closer to irritation. Ethan leaned in, whispering something to her. She shook her head. Julian stopped just short of the center of the room. I'm looking for Ethan Hale and Vanessa Hale, he said, his voice carrying without effort. The room fell silent. Vanessa laughed awkwardly. And you are Julian Mercer, he replied. I represent Margaret Hale. That was when the color drained from Ethan's face. He looked at me then, really looked. And for the first time that night, I saw fear replace indifference. Julian opened his briefcase. I'll be brief, he said. Effective immediately, all financial guarantees previously extended by my client are withdrawn. Murmurs rippled through the room. What does that mean? Vanessa snapped. It means, Julian continued evenly, that the deposit for this venue, the outstanding balance for catering, and the services secured under Margaret Hale's name are no longer authorized. The manager stepped forward, pale. That's over $50,000, he said carefully. Yes, Julian replied, and you'll need an alternative payer before the evening continues. Vanessa laughed again, too loudly. This is absurd. She doesn't have that kind of money. Julian finally looked at her directly. Appearances, he said, can be misleading. Ethan stumbled forward. Mom, what is this? I met his gaze calmly. This, I said, is what happens when you mistake silence for weakness. The room buzzed with tension now. Guests whispered openly. Phones appeared. The celebration had fractured and everyone could feel it. Julian closed his briefcase. We'll wait 15 minutes, he told the manager. After that, this event is no longer contractually covered. Vanessa's composure cracked. You can't do this, she hissed, turning on Ethan. Fix this? Ethan looked between us, between the life he'd assumed and the reality unfolding. I felt no satisfaction, only inevitability. Outside, I stepped back into the night air, Julian beside me. Are you ready for what comes next? He asked quietly. Yes, I said. I've been ready longer than I realized. Behind us, inside the hall, voices rose, accusations, panic. They still believed this was a misunderstanding. They still believed control could be reclaimed. They had no idea that tonight wasn't about money at all. It was about something far more permanent, and they were only just beginning to understand what they had lost. The doors to the ballroom closed behind me, muting the noise but not the tension. I stood just outside, the night air cool against my skin, listening to what I didn't need to hear to understand. Panic has a sound, it's the rise in pitch. The hurried footsteps, the sudden arguments whispered too loudly. Julian checked his watch. 10 minutes left, he said calmly. Inside, the illusion was collapsing fast. I leaned against the stone pillar near the entrance, my golden silk dress brushing the cool surface. My reflection in the glass doors startled me, not because I looked shaken, but because I didn't. My posture was straight, my face composed. The woman staring back at me looked resolved. I hadn't felt this steady in years. A memory surfaced uninvited. Ethan at 12 years old, standing in our living room, insisting he hadn't broken the lamp. His voice had wavered then too. Back then, I'd stepped in, protected him, smoothed things over. Absorbed the consequences so he wouldn't have to. I wondered when protection turned into permission. The doors burst open. Vanessa stormed out first. Her perfect hair was coming undone, one curl loose near her temple. Her eyes locked onto me immediately, sharp, accusatory, frantic. You planned this, she said, her voice trembling with fury. You humiliated us on purpose. I didn't move. I refused to be humiliated quietly, I corrected. She laughed bitterly. You always do this, play the victim, act small, then strike when no one's watching. Julian stepped forward slightly, not threatening, just present. Mrs. Hale, he said coolly, you might want to choose your words carefully. Vanessa ignored him. You think this makes you powerful, she spat. You think money makes you relevant? I held her gaze. No, I said evenly. Boundaries do? Her mouth opened to respond, but Ethan appeared behind her. He looked wrecked, tie loosened, jacket gone. his face pale, eyes darting like he was searching for solid ground that no longer existed. "Mom," he said quietly, "please let's talk." I studied him. For the first time, I didn't see my son as a child or a responsibility. I saw him as a grown man standing in the consequences of his own silence. "We are talking," I replied. Vanessa spun toward him. "Don't do this. Don't let her manipulate you." He didn't answer her. Instead, he looked at Julian. "Is this really happening? The venue says if we don't pay, they're shutting everything down." "Yes," Julian said simply, "that is correct." Ethan swallowed. Then I need help." He turned back to me. "Mom," he whispered, "I didn't know it would go this far." Something inside my chest tightened, not with guilt, but with grief. "You didn't think it would," I said softly. "That's the difference between us." The manager appeared behind them, sweat visible on his brow. "We need a decision," he said firmly. "Either the balance is paid immediately or guests will be asked to leave." Vanessa grabbed Ethan's arm. Tell her to fix this." Ethan closed his eyes. "I can't," he said, her head snapped toward him. "What? I can't ask her anymore," he continued, voice breaking. "I should have stopped this before it ever got here." For a brief moment, the room felt suspended in something close to truth. Vanessa stared at him like she didn't recognize him, then her expression hardened. "Fine," she said coldly. "If she wants a war, she'll get one." She turned back to me. "You think you've won tonight?" she said. "This isn't over. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of woman you really are." I met her glare without flinching. "They already saw," I replied. "You just didn't realize it." Behind her, guests were spilling into the hallway now, murmuring openly, phones raised, whispers turning into speculation. The story was no longer theirs to control. Julian leaned in slightly. 5 minutes. Vanessa's confidence cracked completely. She looked around at the guests, at the staff, at Ethan, who no longer met her eyes. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She reached into her clutch and flung a small object at my feet. "Keys. They're not worth it," she said bitterly. "Keep your precious apartment." The metal clink echoed louder than it should have. I didn't bend down. "I was never giving it away," I said. "You were trying to take it." The manager cleared his throat. "Time's up." The music inside stopped abruptly. Lights dimmed. A collective groan rose from the guests as staff began explaining the situation, apologies rehearsed, professionalism strained. The wedding was effectively over. Vanessa let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "This is your fault," she hissed at Ethan. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned to me. "I should have defended you," he said quietly. "I didn't. And I don't know how to undo that." I searched his face for excuses, found none. "You don't undo it," I said. "You live with it, and you decide who you want to be after." Julian touched my arm gently. "Margaret," he said. "We should go," I nodded. As we walked away, I didn't look back, not at the ruined decorations, not at the guests, not at the woman who thought she could erase me with entitlement. I only felt the steady rhythm of my steps and something else rising beneath it. Freedom. In the car, as Julian drove, the city lights blurred past. "You did exactly what needed to be done," he said after a moment. "I didn't do it to punish them," I replied. "I did it to stop disappearing." He nodded. "That's usually when everything changes." I looked out the window, my reflection faint in the glass. Tonight, they lost control of a story they thought they owned. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't yet see, was that this wasn't the end. It was the moment the truth finally stopped waiting quietly in the background. And it was about to speak much louder than any celebration ever could. The morning after the wedding arrived without ceremony. No pounding headache. No tears. No regret. Sunlight slipped through the sheer curtains of my apartment, landing softly across the living room, the same living room Vanessa had already claimed in her mind. I sat at the small dining table with a cup of tea growing cold between my hands, listening to the city wake up below. For the first time in years, my phone was silent. No polite messages from distant relatives. No forced apologies, no calls pretending nothing had happened, just quiet. And quiet, I was learning, can be honest. I stood and walked slowly through my home. I touched the back of the chair Robert used to sit in. Ran my fingers along the bookshelf we built together one summer when Ethan was still small and asking too many questions. Every object held memory, but none of them felt heavy anymore. They felt mine. By noon, the silence broke. My phone vibrated once. "Ethan," I let it ring, then again and again. Finally, a message appeared. Mom, please, we need to talk. Vanessa is spiraling. The venue is threatening legal action. I don't know what to do. I stared at the words, then placed the phone face down on the table. For decades, I had been the solution to every problem that wasn't mine. I wasn't doing that anymore. The knock came shortly after. I didn't jump. I didn't rush. I opened the door calmly. Ethan stood there alone. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but stripped of the confidence he'd borrowed for years from other people's expectations. His eyes were red, his jaw tense. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He entered cautiously as if the space itself might reject him. His gaze drifted across the room, taking in the artwork, the view, the quiet elegance he had never truly noticed before. "I forgot how nice it is here," he murmured. I closed the door. "You didn't forget," I said. "You just stopped seeing it." He flinched. We sat across from each other at the table, the same table where I had helped him with homework, where we once celebrated his first job, where I'd sat alone more times than I could count, waiting for calls that never came. "I should have stopped her," he said suddenly. "At the wedding, I should have stepped in." "Yes," I replied. He swallowed. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "Losing her," he admitted. "Losing what we were building." I studied him carefully. "And losing me?" I asked. His silence answered for him. "I didn't raise you to confuse love with leverage," I said quietly. "And I didn't raise you to watch someone hurt another person just to keep the peace." His hands trembled slightly on the table. "She said it was practical," he said, "that it made sense. That you'd be better off somewhere smaller. And did you ever ask me what I wanted?" He shook his head. "There's your answer," I said. He looked up at me, then really looked. "I think I let her convince me that you didn't need protecting," he said. "That you were settled, finished?" Something old and tired shifted inside me. "I wasn't finished," I said evenly. "I was just quiet." He pressed his lips together, fighting emotion. "Julian," he said, "who is he really?" I paused. "He's the man who knows exactly how much I've protected you over the years," I answered. "And how much it's cost me." Ethan's breath caught. "You helped us," he whispered. "Didn't you?" I didn't deny it. "The rent," he continued slowly. "The credit cards, parts of the wedding." "Yes," I said. "I helped quietly without asking for thanks." His face crumpled. "She thought you were weak," he said hoarsely. "No," I corrected. "She thought I was invisible." The knock at the door interrupted us. This time I didn't have to guess. "Vanessa." I opened the door and stepped back instinctively, not out of fear but distance. She looked nothing like the bride from the night before. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, her eyes swollen, makeup smudged. Control, the thing she wore better than any dress, was gone. "This is your fault," she said immediately. I didn't respond. Ethan stood. "Vanessa, stop." She ignored him. "You ruined everything," she continued, voice shaking. "People are talking, the venue wants payment, my parents are furious, you embarrassed us." I crossed my arms. "You embarrassed yourself," I said calmly. She laughed harshly. "You planned this, you hid money, you let us believe." "I let you believe what you wanted," I interrupted. "You never asked who I was, you only asked what I had." Her face twisted. "You owe us," she snapped. "You're his mother." I stepped closer. "I owe my son love," I said, "not submission." Ethan moved between us. "Enough," he said quietly. "This ends now." She stared at him like he'd betrayed her. "You're choosing her," she demanded. He hesitated just for a second. "I'm choosing what's right," he said. The room went still. Vanessa's shoulders sagged. "This marriage is already over," she whispered. I didn't feel satisfaction, only clarity. She turned toward the door. As she reached it, she stopped. "You think you've won," she said without turning around. "But people don't forget." "I'm not asking them to," I replied. "I'm asking them to see." The door closed behind her. Ethan sank back into his chair, staring at his hands. "What happens now?" he asked. I stood. "Now," I said, "you take responsibility, you fix what you can, and you learn to stand up before someone else does it for you." He nodded slowly. "And us?" he asked. "What happens to us?" I looked at him, the boy I raised, the man he still might become. "That," I said gently, "depends on what you do next." Later that evening, after he left, I stood alone on my balcony. The city lights glimmered below, indifferent and alive. My phone buzzed once more. A message from Julian. "Legal matters are proceeding. I'll handle it." "You did well today." I closed my eyes. For the first time, I wasn't bracing for the next blow. I wasn't waiting to be erased. I was standing exactly where I belonged. And though the night felt calm, I knew something important. The reckoning had only begun. The silence after Ethan left felt different than the silence before. It wasn't hollow anymore. It wasn't waiting for something to arrive. It was settled. That evening, I slept without interruption for the first time in months. No replaying conversations, no rehearsing explanations. No quiet guilt whispering that I should have done more, been softer, forgiven sooner. Morning came gently. I dressed simply: linen blouse, dark slacks, hair pinned back. No gold silk today, no armor needed. At exactly 9:12 a.m., my phone rang. "Julian, I wanted you to hear this directly," he said. "The venue has formally transferred liability. You are no longer financially associated with the wedding in any capacity." I closed my eyes. "Thank you," I said. "There's more," he added. "Vanessa's parents attempted to dispute the cancellation. It didn't go well. They've retained counsel, but without your backing, their options are limited." I almost smiled. "And Ethan?" I asked. Julian paused. He declined representation. He asked for time. That mattered more than I expected. After the call, I brewed coffee and stood by the window. Below, life moved on as if nothing had happened. People hurried to work. A woman walked her dog. A delivery truck idled at the curb. The world hadn't ended. Mine had simply shifted. By noon, the messages started. First, Vanessa's mother, then an aunt I hadn't spoken to in years. Then a cousin who suddenly remembered my birthday. Concern disguised as confusion. Confusion masked as judgment. "We just want to understand. You must see how this looks." Family should handle things privately. I didn't respond. I was done explaining myself to people who had already decided who I was. The knock at the door came just after 3. I knew who it was before I opened it. Vanessa. She stood straighter this time, controlled again, dressed carefully. Composed like a woman stepping into negotiations, not reconciliation. "I won't take much of your time," she said. "You have 5 minutes," I replied. She entered, eyes scanning the apartment, not with hunger this time, but calculation. "I spoke with Julian," she began. "He's thorough." "He is," I agreed. She clasped her hands together. "This doesn't have to become something ugly," she said. "We can fix this." I waited. She inhaled. "Ethan is overwhelmed. He feels betrayed. He believes you orchestrated this to punish him." I met her gaze. "And what do you believe?" I asked. She hesitated just a fraction too long. "I believe," she said carefully, "that emotions ran high, that mistakes were made. But that destroying your relationship with your only son over property is extreme." I stood. "Leave," I said calmly. Her eyes widened. "Excuse me, you came here to negotiate," I continued. "To minimize damage. To control the narrative, not to apologize." "That's not fair. You slapped me," I said quietly, "in public over something that was never yours." Her face hardened. "You humiliated us," she snapped. "You turned our wedding into a spectacle." "No," I corrected. "You did that when you forgot I was human." She laughed bitterly. "You think you're untouchable now?" "I think," I replied, "that you misjudged me." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You don't know how many people are on my side," she whispered. "Stories travel, reputations follow." I looked at her, really looked. "You still think this is about power," I said. "That's your mistake." She stared at me, searching for weakness. She didn't find it. "5 minutes are up," I said. She turned toward the door, then stopped. "You'll regret this," she said softly. I smiled, not cruelly, not smugly. "No," I said. "I already survived it." After she left, I locked the door and leaned against it, breathing steadily. That night Ethan called. I didn't answer, not because I didn't care, but because I did. Some lessons require silence. The next morning, Julian arrived in person. He laid a folder on the table. "Estate revisions," he said. "Updated protections, contingencies, you're secure." I nodded. "There's one more thing," he added. "Vanessa has been contacting acquaintances, framing the situation creatively." I raised an eyebrow. And it's backfiring," he said. "People are asking questions. The videos from the wedding, multiple angles are circulating." I exhaled slowly. "I never wanted this to be public," I murmured. "You didn't make it public," Julian replied. "You endured it publicly." There's a difference. Later that afternoon, I received a message from Ethan. "I see things now that I didn't before. I don't expect forgiveness. but I'm willing to listen when you're ready. I read it twice. Then I placed the phone down and walked to the balcony. The city stretched endlessly ahead of me, full of strangers, possibilities, and quiet continuations. I wasn't done being a mother, but I was done being a sacrifice. And somewhere between the silence, the documents, and the truth finally spoken aloud, I realized something else was happening. Not just consequences. Not just fallout. A reckoning was taking shape. And soon it would demand answers from everyone involved, not just me. The city woke before I did. Traffic murmured below my balcony, distant and steady, like a pulse that didn't care what had happened the night before. I stayed seated at the small table near the window, my coffee cooling untouched, Ethan's message still open on my phone. I'm willing to listen when you're ready, willing to listen. It struck me how unfamiliar that sounded coming from my own son. For years he had spoken at me, decisions announced, expectations implied, silence used as leverage. Listening had never been part of the arrangement. I didn't reply. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I opened the old cedar box in my bedroom closet. Inside were documents Robert and I had organized meticulously, property records, investment summaries, trusts, notes in his careful handwriting. We had always agreed on one thing: security should be quiet, protection didn't need applause. Vanessa had mistaken discretion for weakness, so had Ethan. At 10 sharp, Julian called. I wanted to update you before you hear it elsewhere, he said. Vanessa has contacted a journalist. I felt no jolt of panic, only confirmation. About the wedding, he continued. Her version. Allegations of emotional manipulation, claims you acted erratically. I closed the box gently. And, I asked. And the journalist declined, Julian said. There's video evidence, witnesses. And frankly, no appetite for defending someone who slapped an elderly woman at her son's wedding. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Still, he added, she may escalate. Let her, I replied. Silence had protected me once. Truth would protect me now. That afternoon, I received another message, this time from someone unexpected. Ethan's childhood friend. A boy who used to eat dinner at our table twice a week. Who once called me Mom by accident and never corrected himself. Mrs. Hale, I'm so sorry. I was there. I should have said something. Many of us should have. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Validation doesn't undo harm, but it does restore balance. I wrote back simply, thank you for saying that. An hour later, there was another knock at the door. I knew this one would come eventually. Ethan. He stood outside looking smaller than I remembered. No suit, no wedding confidence, just a man stripped of performance. I won't come in unless you ask me to, he said quietly. I studied him. Sit, I said, gesturing to the chair near the door. He sat stiffly, hands clasped. I watched the videos, he began, all of them, not just what people sent me, what I didn't want to see. I said nothing. I didn't realize how far it had gone, he continued. How much I'd allowed, not caused, not defended, allowed. You let her speak for you, I said calmly. You let her define what was acceptable? He nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid of conflict, afraid of starting my marriage wrong, afraid of choosing. And so you chose, I replied. Just not consciously, he swallowed. I didn't know about the apartment keys, he said quickly. Not like that, not in front of everyone. But you knew she wanted it, I said. Yes, and you knew how, I added. She planned to get it. Silence, that was answer enough. I'm not here to ask for money, he said suddenly, or help, or forgiveness. I looked at him then. What are you here for, Ethan? He took a shaky breath. To tell you I was wrong, he said, and that I don't know how to fix it, but I want to learn. That mattered, not because it erased anything, but because it was the first honest sentence he'd spoken in years. Learning will be slow, I said, and uncomfortable. I know. It will require distance, I continued. And accountability, I know, and it may never restore what was lost. He nodded again, tears slipping free now. I know, he whispered. I stood. This is where we stop today, I said. Not because I'm done, but because I'm not ready. He rose immediately. I understand. At the door, he hesitated. She's furious, he said quietly. Vanessa, she thinks you planned all of this. I met his gaze. Of course she does, I replied. It's easier than admitting she lost control. After he left, I locked the door and leaned against it, my heart steady, not relieved. Resolved. That evening, Julian sent one final update. Vanessa's parents had withdrawn their support. The wedding debts were now solely the couple's responsibility. Invitations to explain things privately were no longer arriving. Power was shifting, not loudly, but unmistakably. I stepped onto the balcony as dusk settled over the city. For the first time since the wedding, I allowed myself to smile, not because someone else had fallen, but because I hadn't. What lay ahead wouldn't be clean. It wouldn't be quick. But it would be mine, and soon, very soon, the final truth would surface. Not about money, not about property, but about who would remain standing when the noise finally faded. And who would not. The invitations stopped first. No more polite requests to talk things through. No more relatives reaching out under the disguise of concern. No more messages asking me to be reasonable. Silence returned, but this time it wasn't avoidance. It was recalculation. I felt it in the way my phone stayed still, in the way the city outside my window carried on without interruption, in the way my name stopped being passed quietly between people who thought they understood what had happened. They were adjusting. So was I. 3 days passed before Julian called again. Vanessa has retained separate counsel, he said. Not marital, personal. I closed my eyes slowly. That was inevitable, I replied. She's claiming emotional distress and reputational damage, Julian continued. The theory is that your actions caused public humiliation. A pause. But, he added, there's no legal ground. The evidence works against her? I didn't humiliate her, I said calmly. I survived her. Julian exhaled softly on the other end. That distinction matters more than you know. That afternoon, I received a message I hadn't expected from Vanessa herself. It was short. We need to talk. Alone, no greeting, no apology, no pretense, just demand. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I typed 3 words. Through attorneys only. The reply came almost instantly. You're destroying everything. I didn't respond, because the truth was everything had already been built on something rotten. I was simply no longer holding it up. That evening, Ethan came by again. This time he didn't knock loudly. He waited. I won't stay, he said when I opened the door. I just wanted to tell you something. I nodded and stepped aside. He didn't enter, just stood in the hallway like a guest unsure of his welcome. She's moving out, he said. Temporarily, I studied his face. And how do you feel about that? I asked. He hesitated. Relieved, he admitted, and ashamed that I am. I said nothing. She wants me to fight you, he continued. Publicly, legally, socially. She says you've turned people against us. Against her, I corrected gently. He nodded. I told her no. That was new. That doesn't mean I've chosen sides, he added quickly. It just means I'm starting to see where lines should have been drawn. I leaned against the doorframe. And what do you plan to do now? I asked. I don't know, he said honestly. I've spent so long letting other people decide things for me. I looked at him for a long moment. That's your work, I said, not mine. He swallowed. I understand. Before he left, he turned back once more. She says you've always been controlling, he said quietly, that this was inevitable. I met his eyes. She only knows the version of me that refused to disappear, I replied. That tends to upset people who rely on erasure. He nodded slowly. After he left, I sat alone at the kitchen table long into the night. I thought of Robert, of how carefully we had chosen this life, how deliberately we had lived below assumption, how often he'd said one day the truth will matter more than appearances. He had been right. The next morning, the story changed tone, not louder but sharper. Someone leaked the full video. Not just the slap, not just the confrontation, the moments before, the demand, the silence, Ethan's inaction. It spread quietly but thoroughly, and with it came something unexpected. Support, letters, messages, women my age, younger, older. Strangers who recognized the look on my face, the moment when patience finally ends and clarity arrives. One message stayed with me. You didn't ruin a wedding. You ended a pattern. I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop and stood by the window, watching the city breathe. Vanessa was still fighting. Ethan was still unraveling, but I was no longer reacting. I was choosing. And soon, very soon, there would be one final conversation. Not to negotiate, not to reconcile, but to close a door properly. Quietly, permanently. And when that door closed, there would be no applause, no spectacle, just the sound of something ending exactly as it should. The last conversation didn't happen where anyone expected. There were no raised voices, no courtroom benches, no audience waiting for a spectacle. It happened on a quiet morning in a room filled with light. Julian had arranged it carefully, neutral ground, witnesses available but unnecessary, documents prepared but unopened. He called it closure with options. I called it the end. Vanessa arrived first, not in white, not in elegance. In tailored black, sharp and defensive, carrying the weight of someone who had rehearsed every argument and already knew none of them would work. Ethan came a few minutes later. He didn't sit beside her. That was the first thing she noticed. And the first thing that broke her composure. "You don't get to abandon me now," she snapped under her breath. He didn't respond. Julian nodded to me when I entered, golden light catching briefly on the same necklace I had worn to the wedding, not as armor this time, but as memory. We sat. Vanessa spoke first. "This has gone far enough," she said tightly. "You've made your point." "I didn't make a point," I replied calmly. "I drew a boundary." She laughed, short and brittle. "You humiliated me. You turned people against us. You could have handled this privately." "You slapped me publicly," I said. "You demanded my home publicly. You assumed my silence meant consent." Her jaw tightened. "I was protecting my future," she said. "My marriage, at my expense," I replied. Julian slid a single document forward, not toward Vanessa but toward Ethan. He looked down at it slowly. "What is this?" he asked. "A separation agreement," Julian answered. "Prepared at Vanessa's request." Vanessa's head snapped toward him. "You said that was precautionary." Ethan read silently, then he looked up. "You were planning this already," he said quietly, "before the wedding." She stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You're all manipulating him." I leaned forward slightly. "No," I said, "we're giving him information." She turned to me, eyes sharp. "You think you've won," she hissed. "But you've destroyed your own family." I held her gaze. "No," I said, "I saved myself." The room went still. Ethan set the papers down. "I'm not signing anything today," he said. Vanessa stared at him. "What? I need time," he continued. "Real time, not pressure, not ultimatums." She laughed incredulously. "You're choosing her." He shook his head. "I'm choosing accountability." That was the moment. The exact second something shifted irrevocably. Vanessa gathered her things with shaking hands. "This isn't over," she said, voice breaking despite her effort. Julian met her eyes calmly. "For you," he said, "it is." She left without looking back. Silence followed. Ethan didn't speak. Neither did I eventually. Julian stood. "I'll give you privacy," he said, nodding to us both. When the door closed, Ethan finally looked at me. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I don't even expect understanding." I nodded. "That's honest," I replied. "I let her speak for me," he continued. "I let her define strength as control. I forgot who taught me better." I watched him closely. "Remembering is only the first step," I said. He nodded. "I know." We sat in silence for a while, then he stood. "I'll call when I've done the work," he said. "Not before." I smiled gently. "That would be wise." When he left, I remained seated, breathing slowly. The building hummed quietly around me, nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just done. Weeks passed. The story faded from public conversation. Vanessa moved away, Ethan began therapy, and I returned to my life. The apartment felt lighter, not emptier, free. I started hosting small dinners again, friends, laughter. No performance. I wore gold when I felt like it, linen when I didn't. I no longer waited to be invited into rooms. I chose them. One evening, as the sun set behind the skyline, I stood on my balcony and thought of the woman I had been at the beginning of this story. Quiet, patient, enduring things she never should have. I hadn't become someone else. I had simply stopped disappearing. And that more than any confrontation, any document, any consequence was the choice that changed everything. If this story stayed with you, tell me where you're listening from. And if you believe dignity should never be negotiable, stay with me. There are more stories to tell, and some of them sound very much like yours.